Culture reproduces itself. If you want to influence it, you can do that through priorities. You can do that through leadership. You can do that through involvement and mobilization. And then you act your way into a new culture.
Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me on the Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindi Baldi, and today I have Torben Nørby with me. The topic on deck for today is taking the myth that culture has to change slowly to task. Torben is the author of The Contextual Leader, which is like a driving manual for organizations. I mean, it's thick, but it's also like really how-to. Torben is a blend of academic and practitioner. His insights blend practical tools with a profound psychological understanding of how organizations can accelerate cultural shifts. Today's episode is sponsored by ondemandleadership.com. If you are looking to improve communication and cohesion in your top leadership team, we're your huckleberry. Check us out at ondemandleadership.com. And now on to Torben. Hello, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Cindi. I've been looking forward.
Me too. You and I have had great conversations previously. So I'm looking forward to today. All right, let's kick it off. So in your research, which organization surprised you the most in terms of how well, or conversely, how poorly, they aligned leadership style and context? And you don't have to name names. So that way we can protect the innocent. Or maybe the not so innocent.
Absolutely. So coming into organizations as an external, very often it's because people have ambitions of doing something else or fixing something that they feel could be better or maybe even broken. And that means that very often we come in and the first thing that we try to find out with the organization is, what are the intentions? So what are your aspirations from a strategic point of view? What is the current operating model and what's the future operating model, and what does that require from your organization? Because that's a precondition for answering the question, what's the right setup? How do you shape your context so it delivers on the operating model, on the value creation, and on the strategy? And that means that when you meet organizations, you can't say that it's a bad or a good organization, but you can say whether they are in line with what they're trying to create. And very often
I like that.
Yeah. So very often it's a slow slide out of alignment. So let me give you an example. I'm working with a client right now that are implementing a range of transformations in order to reach their aspiration. They are implementing new technology, which encompasses a lot of automation, robot technology. They are implementing AI in their customer service. They are changing the split between in and outsourcing. So they are going to have external partners working directly into their organization, which will change processes and procedures.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. And they've stacked it up because it's connected, right? And that means that the way of taking ownership and accountability in the organization needs to change, because they will go to a much more delegated model. The way that they centralize and decentralize needs to change as a consequence of that. They are changing from more localized processes to globalized processes supported by standard systems, which means that they need to ramp up their discipline culture. They need to ramp up the formalization of their processes, and they need to change the expertise base in the employee composition. So they need to upskill, and all of these things, it's not because they've been doing bad, but all of these transformations trigger a need for finding out, how do we make the culture evolve in waves? So we build that ownership alongside with upskilling so that we make them ready, but also obligate them. So the empowerment moves, people get used to working in the new ways. All of that needs to happen through leadership. So the big transformation plan is now supported by a program of enabling the leaders, committing the leaders. Then they go in, work with their teams, work with the concrete transformations. So that way of working with the culture is very much at the essence of the research behind the contextual leader, that culture reproduces itself. If you want to influence it, you can do that through priorities, you can do that through leadership, you can do that through involvement and mobilization, and then you act your way into a new culture. So this is really a good example of, you asked about good and bad, aligned, misaligned. It's not misaligned because of bad will or wrongdoing.
Well, and I think that that's a really great way of looking at it too. We just sort of kind of go with the bad versus good, because there are definitely some stories out there.
Well, there are bad. There are cultures that are inherently bad. If you look at the criteria, saying the criteria is that the culture should be promoting, enabling the organizational aspirations. Then you've got a leader that has centralized all decisions with him or herself, has created a very weak voice culture because people don't want, to get in trouble. You've got a very, very siloed collaboration culture. That's not optimal to deliver on the value creation in the company, but it's created by very strong owners, or it's created by misconceptions of leadership, and leadership means my direct involvement and me directing everything. So it's not like there's not good and bad, but the recognition is very often that they've been sliding into that. It's not because of bad will, or it's because they've not been aware.
And that could be their personality. I mean, we've been in those kinds of organizations too. We have had some just bad leaders. Like, it was the board who brought us in. Usually we're getting brought in by, and it sounds like for you, we're getting brought in usually by fantastic leaders who are like, hey, like, things have changed and we need to meet the moment. And, or we want things to change and we have to have the extra sort of hands on deck to figure out how to do that. But so I like what you said. I do think there are instances where there are bad. What you described could also not be bad, just like we've been in this organization too, where the former leader was so charismatic and so actually so caring that everybody just got used to going to them for everything, like ridiculous levels of going to this person. And this person is a fabulous person, but their life must have been truly hell. Because like things that should have never been on their plate, and they were basically making all the decisions. And so we were with the person who came in after, who was the opposite. This person was an introvert, also a fabulous leader, but an introvert. And so when everybody was coming to him, like they used to do, his response was, and what's your job title? Like, go forward, do your job. I got your back. Like, basically like pushing them into and it was really deprogramming that had to happen to get people back into doing it on their own.
Yeah, you can say that the person has done this out of good intent. They built organizational habits that have reproduced themselves. So this has become the way we do around here, which is basically the definition of culture. And when you get into an organization and you want to change that because they've grown and it's still the same person, or someone new comes in, then you need to work with the enabling of the people, because empowerment requires that you've got the skills, you know how to make the decisions, you've got the risk appetite for doing so. So we need both the enablement and the obligation. So we need to create these play fields in the organization that sometimes have been narrowed with open communication channels up and down, right? So we need to start empowering people. And as their skill grows, we can expand that empowerment.
Right.
So there are a lot of examples like this where a small organization has grown bigger. Maybe there's 600 now. They still behave like there's 60 people, which totally destroys the governance and the decision-making speed and so forth.
Yeah. And then what I was going to say is so we do see that because we are in organizations where either it's a new leader who's come in and wants to get their own their own ideas out there and working, or it's organizations where, they're trying to grow their bench internally. And so those are just some of the examples. But you're right about probably the dominant way that we get good or bad for the environment is just this natural shift where things are changing externally and the organization has its habits, its culture, the norms that it does. And now we don't actually have alignment, and we have to actually pull back together to sort of get back in sync with the environment.
Absolutely. And so you can say that there are two big drivers that require that we look at the organizational alignment. And one is the intentions of the organization. So if we have a shift in intentions, so for example, we need to start innovating more compared to what we've been doing the past 5-7 years, then that requires that we look at the contextual setup, the structures, the cultures, the people composition to make that happen. Or, as you refer to, a shift in the external environment, if dynamism goes up or risk intensity goes up, or as in the example I gave, that system openness changes so that others have influence into the organization, then we need to realign, look at our structures, decentralization, formalization, interdependence, and look at the cultures and find out which of the subcultures. There are 12 building blocks when we look at company culture, and find out which of these 2-3 subcultures do we need to work on to support that change in way of operating. And it's this alignment that makes the contextual view on leadership so interesting.
I'm going to ask you the next question. What was the moment when you realized traditional models of organizational culture were missing something? What's the path that led you to that insight?
Yeah. So originally, the first job I had when I entered work life was the Army. I was 10 years in the Army as an officer. Met international forces, met different cultures, and found out we do things pretty differently.
Very differently, yeah.
So that's the first kind of recognition. There are differences in the way we do things. And then I moved into business life, exposed to very different business models in the different countries, very different cultures, national cultures. And that's where it really struck me that if we don't understand which few contextual factors are really at play here, then we do not set the organization up for success. Then I became an external consultant out of appetite, actually, of this understanding what makes it work here. How do we really set leaders up for success in this context and that context? So it was kind of a recognition that leaders are put in different contexts. And very often they make choices about that context based on their own personal experience that they generalize to the new context. And as consultants meeting different organizations in very different industries, that's a challenge if we want to do it on experience. So that was the starting point. And I've never looked back, because there's no doubt that those two handles in contextual leadership. One, you need to adapt your leadership to the context to be effective. Two, you need to shape the context to deliver on the organizational intentions. Those two handles, we need to become very concrete in order to do something about them. And the challenge here is that we need to embrace complexity to arrive at simplicity. But the leadership literature seems to try to cut the chase and then go to simplicity and say, 7 steps to success, here you are.
Right.
And that doesn't work. So,
right. Right. It's a piece. Like I think that was one of the things that I had trouble with going through my PhD and just like reading some things that come out, like the 7 steps to success or whatever. Yeah. It's that doesn't mean that they're giving you a comprehensive plan. Right. Like, and so like going through the PhD, like I remember they want you to take, and I think you struggled with this in your PhD. They want you to take a very small piece of it because it just explodes. The complexity explodes exactly. Very rapidly. And so you just take a tiny little piece and we're relying on the people before to build on and the people after us to continue to develop. You know why you're doing it. Like you have to somehow cut it back to something that's actually doable. But it feels so wrong because it's not the whole picture. And you know that.
No, and you can say that the starting point, Cindi, for my research was to solve a real life problem, which is that leaders face this complexity every day. They change the strategy and they need to align the organization. They enter a new organization and need to find out what are the crucial contextual factors here. They enter a new market. They do a merger or an acquisition, which, by the way, most mergers and acquisitions fail because of misalignment in the contexts. Culture is part of it.
Absolutely.
But just as much
we do that. And we do that work too. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's and it's fascinating to watch that. Like that how little it's considered.
Scary or fascinating, one of those two, yes. Yeah. I think that exactly that reductionism, that reducing it to something that can be researched was one of the big struggles I had, and I needed to find my way through that, find a research design that allowed handling that complexity. We arrived at that. We found a research design that could do that for the global studies. So taking that complexity and bringing that to 3 panels and getting their reflections on what can you influence, what works, how does it, what's the knock-on effects on performance and engagement, and then statistically arriving at agreement in these 3 panels and across those 3 panels that these contextual factors, they have a significant impact on performance and engagement and leadership. That allowed me to end up with a framework that it doesn't cover the world, but it covers
it's pretty solid.
A large bite of it.
Yeah, it's pretty solid.
If you
it's almost like a meta dissertation.
So if you can't do anything else with it, you can stack them and then you can put something on top and then it's really high, or you can stop a door with it and do something. I don't know. But the thing is that now, if you look at it, if you get the understanding of the system, because it is a system and
right.
it always is, if you get that understanding, then it's not difficult to arrive at the 3-4 crucial factors, and that is the experience. That in any context, you can identify the 3-4 crucial factors that will really move success. So the art here is not to boil the ocean, but for diagnostics there that allow you then to identify these are the crucial factors. Then dive into those, work with those, and move forward.
How do you teach the leadership to be able to analyze the context?
So that's a very, very good question, because now I'm running programs for people entering the vice president and president level in large scale organizations, and they need to acquire the practical way of working with the organizational alignment as part of their enterprise leadership. And so if we look at the book when I set out, the ambition was to create a framework of analyzing the leadership context, or the context, external, internal, and the intentions, and then arrive at a way of immobilizing and involving the organization. It's called the peer cycle, priorities and principles that you take to people, involve them in interpreting those so that the people who are going to act it out are mobilized and committed. Then we start acting and aligning our behavior, followed by sense giving, so that we act our way into a new culture.
Is it possible to over-adapt to the context?
It's a cool question. Yes, it is. So one example is there's a lot of attention, rightly so, to diversity, inclusion, the benefits of diversity. And that means that in the collaboration culture, if you look at that, there are dimensions of tolerance in there. So, we need to expand our degree of tolerance to different viewpoints, different ways of being. And rightly so, that brings value. But there is a precondition for that bringing value. And that is that you create sufficient, strong common ground So you need some principles that you adhere to, values, ways of working, processes. So you need to build a shared common ground, which is people are educated in, dedicated to, involved, and that they internalize, because that common ground is the precondition for releasing the power of the different perspectives from diversity. And here I've met organizations that overcompensate, go too far on the tolerance side, in good meaning, but they want to embrace diversity. And that ends up being over-inclusive, over-tolerant, rather than making this balance, saying we've got common ground and this is what we expect from each other. And this is what we want from each other in order to make this happen. Without balancing that with sufficient common ground, then what's going to happen is that you do not get the benefits of diversity, because you get fragmentation instead. Value differences coming out of national cultures is one of the parameters that has a huge influence on leadership expectations and how we collaborate. And if you go too far in embracing all viewpoints and wanting to try to match all nationalities, then that becomes very, very, very difficult. So you need to set up some ground rules about this is how we make decisions. These are our role expectations to people in these positions. And then start educating, saying, but if I'm a Dane and I want to participate in everything, so I've got a very... so I think that I should be involved in all decisions. And as Danes, we do. Then we need to level that and understand, but there are some decisions you're going to be in, and there are some decisions you're not going to be in. Whereas other cultures might need to learn to participate in making decisions and taking decisions themselves. So if I've got colleagues from India, they need to get used to that there are certain decisions that are on their table and that they can't ask their immediate manager to make all decisions. So we need to level that out, find common ground in order to benefit from that diversity. Make sense?
Yeah, it does. I had a colleague who, going through my PhD program, this is just a really simple example, but I had a colleague who, he was American, but he had spent years in China. He really loved the Chinese culture. And when he came back, he was working in a large company in Dallas, and they had a Chinese team working with an American team. And these two teams had just been at war with each other. And they were very lucky that they hired my friend, because it was a real problem and they didn't understand why there was a problem. And he walked in and, like, because he knew both cultures so intimately, he was like, oh, I see what's happening here. So in the Chinese culture, when you get an email, it's rude if you immediately respond, because it looks like you didn't consider what you were going to say. In the American culture, you need to respond immediately, or it's rude because it looks like you're getting blown off. And right there, it's the root of just both teams feeling like they're getting insulted and sort of jerked around by the other team, when actually they were both trying to exhibit behaviors to communicate respect. And once both sides knew, like, it changed everything. They were able to then figure out how to work together. But I mean, that's the challenge with the culture, whether it's an organization's culture or it's a country's culture. It's not like these are visible things. I mean, we can have artifacts and things like that for sure. But a lot of the time you're coming up against these invisible norms and you're getting penalized, but you don't even understand why you're getting penalized. And so that's just one example. And this happens at the organizational level too, because organizations have very different cultures. And so, you know, you come in, you've been fully ingrained into whether it's a country culture or it's an organization culture. You come into a vastly different group and you still think like the right way to behave is this other form. And in my opinion, you have to start analyzing the situation just as an individual as to, okay, I'm getting pinged here, I feel. What is it that's different? Like, how are these other people operating? But I like the idea. I do like the idea that, like, if we know that we're bringing in these different groups, then we need to start out with a shared set of rules that are explicit. So people aren't as likely. There's probably still moments because it's hard to do this perfectly, but we need to start them out with this shared set of, okay, explicit expectations. This is how we're going to behave together.
Exactly. But I'm fully in line, Cindi, with your thinking and your experience, because the thing is also that now that was two different nationalities, but in very many companies now we are facing multi-ethnical teams. And that means that one of the assumptions in decades of cross-cultural research is that we've got two different cultures. How do they bend towards each other? How do we find good things from both culture and create a way forward? When you go into a multinational team, you need to start a bit differently. You need to start by saying, what is it that the company is trying to do? So what are the intentions? Therefore, what are the explicit expectations to our behavior when we together try to achieve these? Then we need to go through an interpretation process. So we need to set some principles, go through an interpretation process, which might mean that, for example, we believe in sharing mistakes so that we can learn together. That could be a principle. But the way we do it might look very different in the subsidiary in France compared to the subsidiary in Brazil. That might look different. But by involving the people in those subsidiaries and say, but how do we do that? What's okay behavior? What's not okay behavior? What do we commit to in order to make this principle come alive here? Now, what we do here is that we form principles based on the intentions of the value creation in the organization. And after that, we fully recognize that we are different, but we need to interpret. How do we translate that into doing that in our subsidiary? And when you involve a multinational team in doing that, then you make a cohesion. You create that glue that makes them collaborate, and then we can handle the diversity. Yeah, shoot.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I mean, like, that's the point of a principle, right? Like, a principle should actually be able to bounce around different cultures. It's just going to be implemented differently.
Correct.
And so you don't lose the principle. Implementation is just different.
Yep. And in most international companies, there is an understanding that there is a common ground that we need to adhere to, integrate with, and we need to embrace that. And then we can add our cultural differences on the side of that and in continuation of that. And it's exactly that recognition that to make companies function optimally across borders with many different nationalities, we need something to rally around. And of course, the purpose is there, but we need to go further than the purpose. We need to translate it into the common ground, common values. And then we need to go through the interpretation process, because that's where it falls off.
Right.
If you just think you can communicate values.
Yeah. If you just list the values, you're not getting anywhere.
You're not getting anywhere. No, I agree. So,
yeah. And if you have too many values that you're trying to push, you're also not getting anywhere, because nobody can do that calculus.
Exactly.
But, I think it's a good lesson. Like, out of necessity, the international companies have had to do this. I mean, there's really no way for them to have operated successfully without figuring out how to create that shared ground and make it concrete. But honestly, like, that needs to happen in every organization.
Yep.
Because again, even in the US, yeah, we share similarities. But again, like, every organization, even within the same country, same industry, they have different cultures. And to the extent that you are communicating that better or more explicitly, because we kind of just, like, again, these cultures emerge from the path that the organization took.
The same mechanism that drives cultural integration into common ground is actually also one of the key drivers when we work in dispersed organizations. So the internationalization, where people have started collaborating across vast geographies, the pressure from COVID, where all of a sudden we had to collaborate and work from home, that all comes back to how do you create that cohesion, that shared, that common ground that allows people to actually attach to something, because there's a balance between that attachment, that belonging, and then isolation.
Right.
That's a centerpiece in working with the context, mobilizing people to understand how do we create those shared processes? How do we create those cultures that support those processes? If you do not do that, people will identify with something else. So if I do not identify with my company, I might identify with my professional doing. So I'm an IT programmer or I'm a technical engineer. And that means you'll have a higher attrition rate, right? So it's really a centerpiece in understanding how do you create belonging, the foundation for engagement. How do you reach a stronger culture? Because how much of the culture is shared is one of the strength drivers when you look at a culture. How strong is it, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. Obviously, in the U.S., we have been having a lot of organizations that are trying to pull people back to work, and honestly, like, I'm torn, right? Because I definitely see it's so much easier for the bonding to happen when everybody's co-located and having a co-experience. But it's such a huge waste for some jobs, it's such a huge waste of time to have people actually come in.
But let me offer you a perspective, Cindi, on that, because the important thing here, there's a difference between working over the distance and hybrid working. Because working over the distance is because you're forced to. So you have to collaborate with the factory that is placed, 200 miles away. You can't move. You can't get together. Okay, that's one situation. The other situation is that we've got hybrid working. That means that people are allowed the flexibility to work from home, out of convenience, out of saving time, thriving more, and so on. And that means that we need to understand which criteria are we actually using for deciding what level of flexibility are we allowing. We need to understand what is the value creation in the interaction. So if we are solving wicked problems, if we are trying to innovate, if we are starting up projects with a lot of moving parts, if we have a very intensive interdependency between the people on certain tasks, while other tasks are more focused tasks, that means that basically you rely on your own analytical capacity or your own processing. You've got a very low interdependency. Now, if I start understanding this, then we start saying, we need 2 days a week where we want everyone in the office and we want these tasks placed here. So when we've got the startup meetings, when we've got the meetings where we do innovation or difficult interdependency planning, I want people present because that creates value. Whereas on the other days, we want you to place the focus tasks, the independent tasks, because that actually ramps up the value creation on those. And when you go into that dialogue with your people, then all of a sudden that it doesn't become, I want this flexibility or that flexibility. It becomes a shared
recognition. It's what makes sense for the work.
Exactly. But I want to decide that as a leader and then say, let's put some, ground rules around that and then navigate together.
Well, and I agree with you. I agree that the type of the work that you're doing and the level of interdependence is going to determine whether or not you have to be in or not. But even for the stuff even for the workers who their job is much more decentralized or much more independent, I do think it's been a challenge. I don't think it's impossible, but I do think there's been a challenge for organizations figuring out how to make them still feel connected when, everything they're doing, they're the full shop.
Yeah.
And, there's really nothing holding them to the company. And so I think that a lot of companies have decided, well, we're going to get them to come in because we need them to bond. But I think that triggers some resentment, right? Like, I'm coming in, I don't need to be in. It's actually more of a distraction. I'm less productive.
I fully agree. And there's no simple answer to this, but there are some drivers. And that means if you want to build organizational cohesion, that means that you want to strengthen the collaboration culture. There's no doubt that cohesion is one of the drivers. And cohesion is very, very difficult to build if you only have digital relations. So one example from a company I've worked in, a large-scale engineering consultancy that works globally and helps governments and companies all over the world build infrastructure, solve social problems, and so on. They are really a dispersed organization, and many of them are very focused on the task. So some of them had a problem, seeing, why should I come to office, But one of the big drivers is, how do you disseminate knowledge and experience in an organization like this? And by building processes around, how is it you involve the newcomers, the less experienced? How is it that we work with the seniors, delegating the lower end of their tasks, which are the higher end of the development curve for the ones with less experience? How do you do that? You can't just delegate it because they don't have the skills yet to fully take the task. They need guidance and so on. So by finding that value creation in the middle, we built a shared understanding of that value creation is a shared task. And therefore, we facilitated the process of them defining the principles for knowledge transfer, for including and integrating newcomers and lifting people to the different stages of their seniority in engineering or technical capabilities. And that's created a shared sense of saying, but we've got a learning culture we want to protect. So we have these sprints, these weeks, these days, we want to be in the office. So there are pathways moving forward, but you can't do it to people. You need to do it with people because it needs to make sense. If you just say Monday to Friday, you need to be in the office, and no wonder you trigger a bit of resentment.
Oh, for sure. And I've seen it happen, and I've seen it happen with groups of people who have low interdependence. But it was a fairness issue, right? Like, the reason why they did it was, the rest of the organization has to be back. Well, that's the structure of their job. And honestly, I think some leaders have done it too, because they don't have good measurement systems on productivity, and it makes them very uneasy that they can't see what people are doing for work. But if you actually have good measurement on what performance looks like for your people, then the answer is they're either doing their job or they're not.
So you're striking something that's interesting here, is in regards to, the fairness. The fairness culture is one of the subcultures. And in the fairness culture, we find three drivers. One of them is discussability. So are you able to discuss what is fair? Why is this not allowed for you? Why is it allowed for these people over there? And the two other drivers is distribution and procedure. So distribution, do I think that the allocation of resource, the right to work at home, is fair? Do I think that the procedure for deciding it, for arriving at who can and who cannot, and the way that people are treated in that process, those three drivers, if we don't strike that at a level where we meet the expectations, if the discussability is not there, then that weak fairness culture will undercut a lot of management decisions, because the way it's received is that it is converted to misconceptions and discussions among employees that create resentment, that create this detachment. So you're striking something that's interesting whenever we look into an organization, and that is the fairness culture. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is like the 3 buckets, thinking about it in terms of like, which one are you not really hitting that is causing to kick off fairness issues? Because it is pretty interesting. Some organizations, it's just everything is, it's not fair. It's not fair.
Exactly. And that fairness is sometimes followed by a weak voice culture. So that means that
absolutely
people think it's vastly unfair, but they don't have the psychological safety. They don't raise their voice because the voice culture is not strong. And that means that we've got, this is one of the examples of an alignment where you need to go in through leadership and start establishing principles that you then start interpreting with people, saying, how do we actually raise issues like this? How do we discuss those? How do we uncover the different perspectives when we arrive at decisions? How do we explain decisions? And if we don't form principles for that, so we start interpreting it, we won't raise the understanding. And if I don't understand, I don't accept. And if I don't accept, well, it creates the opposite of cohesion, which detachment or resentment.
Right. Yeah, it's a real challenge with many organizations.
The good thing about discussing when there's a lot of experience to share from is that those perspectives, there are a lot of different pathways when we work with people and organizations. What I focus a lot on is trying to make the difficult stuff tangible. So
you do it really well.
Mobilize. Thank you. But really try to mobilize the leaders, give them a language. And I know that sometimes we cut out some of the nuances and so on. But if we can leave leaders with something that is so approachable that they can take it to their people and together with them move towards shared leadership rather than it's the leader who leads, then you open up a different way of mobilizing an organization. And with the level of knowledge workers we have today, with the transparency and access to knowledge, with the pressure on the workforces, with the new generations coming into the workplace, we need to see a shift in leadership towards shared leadership, which means we need leaders who can address things that are more difficult to address and involve people in discussing that. And that's where the peer cycle comes in. You don't lose control. On the contrary, you create the commitment, which is a different way of controlling. So
sure.
Rather than trying to be that Christmas tree where everything goes over the star, right? Everything needs to go over the leader. That doesn't work. So we need to shift that into the organization. So that's where I'm coming from. That's
awesome. Thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely.
And thanks for joining us today. And we appreciate any likes and so forth, all that stuff, wherever you are. We appreciate anything that helps us raise our visibility. Thank you all. See you next time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on Management Muse. We are a podcast/YouTube channel that we hope is entertaining and educational. If you are on YouTube, we would appreciate you subscribing and maybe leaving a comment and a like. If you are on any of the podcasts listening to this, we would appreciate stars, following, comments, all the good stuff. We want to say thank you to Sarah and Rebecca. And then just as a last minute reminder, we also want to mention that we are management and communication professionals working in the field, but also have degrees that back us in science. All that being said, we are talking in generalities on this podcast. We do not actually know your particular situation. So proceed with common sense and maybe a little bit of experimentation on your end. And we hope that you make the world a more beautiful place by making work a more enjoyable place. See you next time on Management Muse.